I think it all comes down to focus. Like, I think that this is the one thing that people, I'm now referencing the book, The One Thing again, but like that is what makes, like, that's the recipe for success.
Have you ever met someone and thought their job sounded cool? Or perhaps you're wondering how you can get to a position that doesn't seem to match any of the qualifications you have at the moment? Well, if so, this podcast is for you.
We found some people with jobs that you might not necessarily know about or expect people to have, and we're going to ask them about how they got there.
Welcome to What Do They Do? A podcast about jobs and how people got them.
Right. Now change my voice.
And now I'll put on my podcast voice.
Yes, exactly. Welcome. No. Cool. Welcome everyone to the podcast. Today we have Brittni with us, and without further ado, I'll pass over to say, hey Brittni, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for your time. And what do you do?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, I'm a workshop designer. I kind of describe myself as a workshop designer, facilitator, and event host. And so I do kind of all of those things. I also do sort of trainings and coachings around all of those things. I live in Berlin, so I kind of like work out of Berlin from home mostly, other than when I'm traveling and running workshops and going to events. Kind of all around the world, which is really cool. So it, like, in essence, I think when people ask me what I do, it's like, I think what I should actually say is that I gather people together to achieve great things, solve complex problems, and have a bit of fun while we're doing it. So I love it.
That's the interesting bit as well at the end. You love it. And also,
yeah.
In theory, on the podcast, we don't want to get anyone on who's got a nice, straightforward answer to that question. We are looking for those people who have to go, a bit of this and a bit of that.
What do I do? Yeah.
Yeah, like, depends on my mood, depends on the day. So that's totally the really interesting bit, and therefore a perfect guest. So, awesome. In terms of workshopping, facilitation, and kind of event host, is that an even split? Is there one that you prefer over the other? Like, how do they kind of sit with each other at the moment?
So I recently read this book called The One Thing. Have you read this?
I've not read it. I've heard of it.
You've heard of it.
It's on a long list.
Is it on your list?
Yeah.
Perfect. Absolutely. As long as it's on there, I'm happy, because this book really sort of changed the game for me. And I realized that what I needed to do was really identify what my one thing is, and then make sure that all the things that I'm doing are sort of revolving around it. So I realized that my one thing really is kind of hosting and gathering. So that's sort of what, like, now all of the things that I do professionally are revolving around that. So, workshops, very much about gathering, very much about hosting. Facilitation, obviously, designing a workshop is about how can we make sure that this is, an effective use of our time, that we're bringing the right people together, that we're tackling a challenge that's worth our time and all that stuff. Facilitation, obviously, same thing. And then event host is something that I always did because people would sort of would ask me to do it, and I love doing it, but I never really promoted myself as that. But now I've really identified that that's the direction that I want to go into, is very much in sort of hosting, gathering. So all of those things, like, I would say, are a pretty even split right now. This time of year, definitely more like workshops. Everybody's kind of like kicking off, their year and figuring out what they want to do. So there's a lot of sort of strategy building and stuff like that. I find in the summer, it starts to be a lot about events and conferences and people wanting someone to come and host or, facilitate their program. So yeah, it's definitely, I would say, an even mix, which is cool.
I suppose the event host is interesting. Does that just mean you clearly are happy getting in front of people? People spotted that you were happy getting in front of people, and kind of, for those people that didn't want to, they're like, Brittni's really good at this. And it just sort of snowballed?
It kind of, I think, well, first of all, I think people underestimate the power of having a host at any kind of event, even like a team team retreat. Like I've done that a few times and it's really fun. Like having someone come from the outside who's not a part of the team, but is sort of like making it a more of an event than just like, oh, the team's together for a couple of days and we're just working. But it's like, no, this is a special event. We even have a host, an MC, basically kind of like guiding us through everything. So, but yeah, it did sort of spring up from people realizing that, I've kind of always, I guess we're going to probably talk about that, but I've kind of always loved being, loved. I mean, I was scared of it, of course, at first, but I was always in like drama in school and I was always sort of doing these like performances and things. It's like very embarrassing to think about what I like, just even as like a small, like little kid, I was always like, here's the dance that I just made up. Everybody watch, it's like a bit much. These days I've dialed it back to hopefully when I'm in front of people, it's very valuable for them. That's one thing I've learned. But yeah, so I always kind of did that and people sort of picked up on it through the workshops, basically. Like, so I would be running workshops and people would be like, oh, she's good at sort of like explaining things and good at sort of bringing people or getting people excited and motivated about things. So then I started doing talks at conferences and then sort of, someone asked me to host their conference for them. And I thought, that's really cool. I could do that. That's fun. And so then it kind of just, went from there.
So you mentioned kind of creating the dances and I assume this
and
is
the
like
plays
this is family gatherings, like everybody I have something to show you.
Yeah,
so
terrible.
So young and you're Canadian, right? So did you grow up entirely in Canada in terms of your schooling time?
Yes. Yeah, my whole upbringing was in Canada, and for the majority, like almost all of it, was in Calgary, Alberta, which is a really beautiful part of Canada, very close to the Rocky Mountains. So spent a lot of time in like nature and outdoors and stuff. But yeah, I couldn't wait to get out of Canada by the time that I was, old enough to do so. And then I mean, I didn't leave right away, but I sort of was always very interested in exploring and living somewhere else and seeing how, other people in the world live differently. And yeah.
So Brittni at school was thinking, I'm going to be a facilitator workshopper and event host so I can get out of here then. Is that what is that what the plan was?
Absolutely not. Yeah, definitely not. So basically, I was thinking about this because you had all of these great sort of questions that you sent me beforehand to think about. And one thing that I definitely, in discovering my path and where I want to take my career, I did spend quite a bit of time thinking about like, what did I really enjoy as a kid? Like, what was it? And those things stuck out, the things of like wanting to perform for people, wanting to kind of maybe bring joy and whatever to my parents and their friends who were so kind and so patient. But there was a lot of that. Also, I always had this dream. This is like so funny. I even wrote it, I think in my like grade 2 or 3, like, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I wanted to have my own talk show. That's what I said. I was like, I'd like to be the host of my own talk show. And it's really funny because, I mean, there's so many parts of my life and my career now that are very much similar to that. I do a lot, like I do actually do a lot of hosting. I do a lot of kind of like event stuff, a lot of like connecting with people. And I think that's another thing that I really loved about the kind of like talk show thing was like the interview and sort of like really getting to know people and that kind of thing is also super interesting. So people have always been big ever since I was young. And then also the kind of like connection and hosting and providing a bit of an experience, I guess. Yeah.
Grade 2 or 3 is quite early to be aware of talk shows. Because in my head I was thinking, who was which talk show kind of inspired you? And I was like, grade 2 and 3, that's young. What talk shows were you watching?
I mean, I definitely, maybe I was a little bit older than grade 2 and 3. Because how old are you in grade 2 and 3? Like 7? 7, 8?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I think
I'm so bad with this.
I'm trying to do the
so maybe I was closer
into
to like 10. 9, 10. And I would have been, the talk shows that would have been on would have been the Oprah show, would have been the big one for sure. And that was like, it was always on after school at like 4 p.m. And I like got home from school and would watch it. And like, I didn't like watch it with my mom, which would have made more sense because it's Oprah. It's not for children, but I just loved it. I thought it was like, I always looked at it and thought that's the coolest job. Like you get to just like sit and talk with people as your job. I was mesmerized.
So have you ever got the chance at an event to do the, you get a, and sort of throw out the prizes?
I'm so happy that you brought that up because I actually do that all the time. I do love giving gifts, like I love the idea of just surprising people and being like, that's for you. And then they're like, what? I did a talk recently that was all about giving workshops and how to kind of give really kind of powerful workshops or workshops that are not just good, but actually are really great. And one of the things that I talked about was creating these kind of peak moments within your workshop. So kind of orchestrating a few things where your whole plan is actually to create a memorable moment for people. And so what I did was in my talk, I had like some sweets. I had bought this, like, there's this Berlin popcorn brand and they make really fancy popcorn. So I bought like a few of those and I brought them and put them on the side of the stage in a little bag so no one could see them. And then I asked people about like what their peak moment was at the conference, and anybody who answered, I like threw them a bag of popcorn. And it was so funny because like, it was so cheesy and so ridiculous, but people loved it. Like everybody thought it was really, like I made it obviously a funny thing where it's like, this is so not a big deal. Like bringing popcorn and giving it to someone is like the absolute bare minimum of something that I could, do to like have a peak moment. But that's the point, is that it doesn't need to be a lot. It just needs to be kind of surprising and thoughtful in a way. So yes, I've had my Oprah, you get a car and you get a car or whatever. Yeah.
You say it doesn't have to be a lot, but if that were the case, why doesn't everyone do it? It's one of those questions. Yeah. And I have a sneaky suspicion then that you might have read The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath.
Yes, of course. I love that book. It's one of my favorites. Very influential, not only in my work, but also in my life. I just think those two absolutely nailed it. It's a fascinating read. Like even if you in any way in your like life or work are somehow planning things that involve people, then you have to read this book.
It's so powerful, isn't it? That's one I have read that got off the list and in front of me, and I use it a lot. I refer to it a lot. There's the popsicle, the hotel with the popsicle fridge, I think is referenced in that one.
Right.
And that's the one I referenced a lot. So this is as I remember it, you sit by the pool and there's a popsicle hotline. There's a phone.
Yes,
so you can ring in your popsicle order and they will bring it to you. And the point being, they could have just put a self-serve fridge next to the pool, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They got a phone to make it that little bit more memorable.
It's brilliant. Yeah. And there's so many good stories in that book and so many references where to give you ideas on sort of how to kind of design things to be a little bit more impactful. I just love the whole story about, like, I think he talks about Disneyland or Disney World or something like that, but how people just they only remember highs and lows, like ultimate highs and ultimate lows. So if you give them more ultimate highs throughout a very average experience, they'll remember it as being much better than if you even if the experience is like a little bit better across the board, but there are no peak moments, no kind of big highs, then people remember their experience as being not as good, which is just fascinating to me. And I just love, those are the kinds of things that I love because I guess I'm a little bit of a control freak. So it's like, I like the idea that I can sort of, and this sounds bad, but like manipulate the situation a little bit, But
I suppose for a facilitator and someone who designs and runs workshops, then that must be a huge bit of knowledge to take in. That must surely go into how you design everything.
Yes, 100%. I think about it every time I run a workshop or an event. I think, okay, and of course the biggest times, you want to start with a bang, start with something where people feel like, oh, wow, really appreciated it, or they feel very happy to be a part of whatever it is, you're about to do. And then of course at the end you have to end with something. And even if you don't have a lot of time, I think people are often like, oh, I couldn't do anything special because I didn't have enough time. It's like one of the best things, the quickest thing that works really well is at the end of, if it's a short workshop, even if it's a long one and everybody's exhausted and you're like, I just can't squeeze one more thing into this workshop. What I'll do is I'll just go around and say, can everybody just give me one word to describe your experience today, or your experience in this workshop, or how you're feeling right now, or whatever. And so everyone can provide one word. And usually the words are very positive, hopefully. Sometimes they're not. Like sometimes they're also like curious. I love whenever people say that. They're like curious. And it's like day one of your 3-day workshop. You're like, oh, you're a skeptic. You're not sure yet, which is also totally fine, right? Yeah, you're undecided. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But just even that leaves people with the feeling, even if they're not like super positive about, like their word isn't like amazing, they still are reflecting on what they did with you. And that is powerful in and of itself, right? It kind of reminds them, they have a moment to think about all the exercises you did, all the work you put in, and it leaves them feeling accomplished and hopefully kind of like motivated as well a little bit. But yeah, it's like there are really small things you can do to make sure that people are leaving your experience, your event, and feeling good about it. That's what you want.
And it's really useful that you used a very manageable example there, because obviously you facilitate workshops and you travel around and get brought in by clients to kind of make it a little bit more than just their meetings or their kind of something to do internally. But that sounds like something people could do generally in their meetings, just to not make them suck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Honestly, yes. That would be nice if people put a little bit more thought into meetings, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Though, obviously, poor meetings do provide the right ingredients for a facilitator to come in and show them what they've been missing out on. So let's,
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? Keep having crappy meetings. That's fine by me. I'll come in and wow everybody.
Cool. So I'm keen to explore the at school in Canada through to ending up in Berlin, or at least ending up outside of Canada, and kind of what that trajectory was, if you're open to talk about that bit.
Yeah, sure. So I was always, like in school, I was always a very good student. So I really loved school. I've always loved learning. Also, I'm very social. So going to school was just fun for the most part, obviously not all the time, but it was very fun for me. I had a really solid group of friends, which was really, special and lucky. I'm still friends with them today. Like I've known them since I was 5 years old. So that was all a very like nice experience, with a couple of hiccups, obviously, as you do as a kid. Yeah. I left high school and was very unsure of what I wanted to do, to be honest. I had no idea. Like I knew that I had to go to university, which is funny, just because it was very, very important to my parents. And in the sense of like, my parents hadn't gone to university and they were like, you're going to university because we know how, like, and it's funny because now I feel like university is less important, but I think, when I was going, which was like 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, it was still very important to go to university. Like it was hard to get a job, a professional job without a degree. So I was like, okay, I need to go to university, and I wanted to go to. I liked learning, so why not? But I had no idea what to do. And so I ended up doing, right out of high school, I went and did my first year of university, and I did this open studies, which is like what they tell you to do if you have no idea what to do. And you just kind of take all these different classes and you sort of see what sticks, right? Like, what are you interested in? And I have to tell you, I think maybe for some people that might work. It did not work for me at all. Like I just took all these random classes, found out that I was interested in psychology. Okay. Found out that like, I always really liked math, and so I took like a couple of calculus classes. And it's like those two things, psychology and math, like what, and so I just sort of, history class, I like almost failed my history class. All these kinds of things, like I found, I just sort of was, it was too all over the place, I think. And I needed more life experience in order to make this call. So then I took a break. So after my first year, I was like, okay, I need to reassess what I'm doing here. And I took some time off to figure that out. And then I ended up deciding to go back to university for it's like a communications program, but it was specialized in public relations. Which is so funny because you don't even hear people say public relations anymore, but it was so cool back in the day. It was like the thing, and everyone, it was really funny too. Everyone always said like, they're like, oh, PR. Yeah, you'd be great at that, Britt, because you're so bubbly. And I never understood. I'm like, yeah, I was like, this feels like a career path for someone who's like, not very smart or something. But anyways, no, I don't know. Anyway, I don't believe that, by the way. Being good at PR is very strategic and very business oriented, and totally. But I think that people there's a lot of misconceptions about it. So anyways, I went back to university and took this specialized PR program. So I got a bachelor's of communication in PR. And then kind of was like, oh, I could work at like a PR agency. I was very excited about agency work because I thought, yeah, fast paced, fun. And I'm going to be doing all these cool things. And I'm basically going to I'm trying to think of who I was thinking about, like movies or TV or whatever, like select personalities but anyway, I thought that'd be really cool. It was not.
There were a lot of films, weren't there, probably in that period,
yes, everybody was in PR.
And they were in agencies. I mean, I'm thinking of Big, but that's more of a toy agency you worked in.
Yeah, exactly. But there were always like the PR person in the movie was always like dressed really nice and like on point and like knew what they were doing and always very busy, right? They were always busy. So I thought that's cool. Like that's what I want. I want to be like a cool businesswoman, Then I started working at agencies, and I just
was it not
really
as you
didn't
imagined?
like it. It was not at all as I imagined. I also was working in kind of at an agency that was sort of specialized in fashion, or like my clients were in fashion. And I also discovered that world was not for me either. Very, at least at the time, and I think that might be changing, but the time is super judgmental, very just not me, not warm. The fashion world is not a warm world. It's not a nice, friendly place, and that's where I want to be. I want to be with the nice, friendly people, So I discovered that wasn't for me. Agency life, or at least that kind of agency, I was just like, I just found myself being like, I don't care about this, like I don't really, there's nothing that I'm not motivated for this kind of work. And that's actually when I had my moment of like, I think I'm going to get out of Canada. I think I'm just going to go and I'm going to see what else is out there just for a little while and just kind of figure it out. And I ended up signing up to do a course for like a TEFL course, which is that like teaching English as a foreign language. Oh, yeah. It's called TEFL. And that was my idea, was like, I'll do that. And then I can like live abroad in Europe somewhere and I can teach English and then I can travel, when I'm not teaching or whatever. So that was my big idea. Yeah. And then I did that. Somehow it brought me to Berlin really kind of randomly, very like haphazardly. Like Berlin wasn't even on my radar for the longest time. And then, I was sort of assessing where to go, and I thought, oh, I'll go to France because I speak French and, I was in French immersion back in Canada. So I was like, oh, I can use my French finally in a real way. But France is really, they don't really want people there. Like it's tough to get a visa for a lowly Canadian for France. They're like, no, we don't want you, especially your Québécois français, we don't want that here. So I was like, okay, well, that's going to be tough and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long story short, I ended up in Berlin and fell in love with it almost immediately, like really loved this city.
It's a very cool city, isn't it?
It's a very cool city. And I think there was a little bit of this sort of, it felt too cool for me, and I liked that. You know, I like I've never really identified as like a cool person. I'm much more of like kind of quirky and weird. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm the kind of person that's like, because I'm so friendly and bubbly, people often are like, oh, like there's no have you ever heard this? Okay, sorry, I keep trying to describe it. I'm just going to say this because I think it like really puts the pin, like just really nails it. Is it's like I've always wanted to be seen as like the cool, mysterious type, you know, but I never stopped talking. So it's like, you know, everybody knows what I'm thinking because I'm always talking, you know? So anyway, I liked that. I liked that Berlin was like, yeah, right? There is, you know,
also, you,
the cool
like
people
saying
are quiet.
Saying you're not the cool kid, is that just, that feels like a reference though to the movies that we watch where, you know, there's like, which one of them am I? Oh, I'm not that one. I'm not that one.
Totally.
Kind of end up in the back of the scene.
I had my day as a cool person, which was kind of fun. Like when I was very young, early elementary days, I was cool. Junior high became uncool, to the point where I'm really glad that happened, actually, because I feel like that helped me like develop a bit more of a personality. You know what I mean? If you're always the cool one, like you have, right? Like you need to have moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like these people don't like me, or like whatever, to help you kind of figure out who you actually are and not just, you know.
I'm glad someone else has said it out loud, because I've always thought that, thinking, you know, to make myself feel better.
Is it okay to say? Yeah. I know.
But someone else thinks it too. I mean,
yes.
I was very good at maths. I was tall compared to everyone else up until I got to the age of about 12 or 13, and then I stopped.
And then,
so I had a little moment of being like, "Hey, little people," and then whoosh. And then I did engineering at university. So like I can really pull the not cool card.
That is good. Engineering also. I am friends with a lot of engineers, or what was in university, friends with a lot of engineers, and it's an interesting group of people, you know?
You put that delicately.
You're like, I was praying that you weren't going to be like, interesting how, but no, but it's like it is a funny sort of, you have your people who are engineers, but they're also, but then you have the engineers, you know, who have an engineer brain, and they're just like always kind of like, I don't know, thinking.
Oh, we're super fun to be around. Like,
I mean, you know,
stacking a dishwasher with us is not fun.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're fun to be around, so that's good.
That doesn't go there.
Yeah. What are you doing? Oh my gosh, that's a huge fight in my household with my German husband. Honestly.
I mean, we don't want to stereotype, but
but there's but I mean, he'd be the first one to tell you that he has very German tendencies, but then also not in a lot of ways. But his like organizational and like wanting things to be sort of like right and in a certain way, definitely very German. Yeah, it's interesting.
So I think I digressed you around the cool bit,
right.
But I think we arrived in Berlin.
Yes.
Discounted France.
Yes.
And
that's right. Okay, so
we're sticking with Berlin now. Is that right?
Yes, I was like, basically I fell in love with the city. I taught English for about 6 months, probably in total, so not very long. But so kind of what happened, two big things happened. One, I met my current partner / husband while teaching English. I had positioned myself as a business English teacher because I was like, they're the ones who have money. Also, teaching kids is mostly just babysitting, to be honest. Really frustrating. And so I was like, okay, cool. And also like, that's something that I can add. I was like, that's a valuable skill that I could give people is like, let's improve your business English. So I'd positioned myself as that. And my current partner reached out to me for English lessons. And yeah, it's just so funny. I joke about that all the time. That we kind of like, we're doing English lessons, and then things are starting to feel kind of more flirty. And then you're like, are we on a date or are we doing an English lesson? But then I'm still charging him money, and things got really weird for a while. I was like, okay, we have to cut the English classes because I just don't feel good about it anymore.
Are you having to try and explain this to friends of like, so I teach English to this guy who pays me.
Yeah.
But I kind of like him.
Yeah. I'm like, we're kind of like, and then we started doing like English lessons. We would like we'd like go have a drink or something. And it's like, oh, well, this is just like, this is basically a date, that you're paying me for. So there's just a lot there that you want to avoid.
Did you really play around with the venue? So initially did a sense of venue, and then like, should we get on a roller coaster today? Should we go to a fair?
Well, it was, because I didn't have he was also like didn't have sort of a set office space. And I also obviously didn't. I was just like new to Berlin, whatever. So the first things we did were we would go to we both really like coffee, and we kind of bonded over that. So we would go to all these cool little coffee shops. Anyway, so yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then we kind of realized, okay, maybe it's more than this English thing. And then we started dating. So that kind of happened, which obviously kept me in Berlin. But also, I found my footing a little bit more in my career. So I realized, teaching I actually really loved. And that's really funny because it's also something that I discovered through English language teaching, that I actually really do love coaching and teaching. I think it's very rewarding. And I've done that basically ever since in my career. So, but what happened was I found a position in more kind of like marketing advertising. And so I was working for a small advertising agency doing really cool, actually doing like some like idea, like coming up with literal ideas for advertisements, doing like script writing and storyboarding, and also just like pitching to clients and stuff. It was super fun. And then I, from there, I went freelance for a very short period of time. And then I found AJ&Smart, which is a design agency in Berlin. And so I found them and started working there. And that's where I was introduced to the workshop. That was like the big learning for me was through the design sprint, was how I kind of like learned about workshops and how powerful they can be. And I was just mesmerized. I remember the first time back then the company was much smaller, and what they did was I met with them and they were like, we feel like there's a good fit here, like personality wise. Why don't you come and watch a training that we're running? It was the first training they'd ever run. They're like, why don't you come and like observe, and you can like make coffees and stuff and like learn about the design sprint yourself. And so I did that. I was the coffee girl at the training, and I like kind of hung back and listened to everything and sort of learned about the design sprint myself. And thought, wow, this is super cool. And then I sort of weaseled my way into a position there. I was like, here's what I can do for you. And I kind of pitched myself as there. I was like, I can do all your social media stuff. We can like really bump that up. And then, and then I did that. And then I also, at the same time, while I was at AJ&Smart doing social media stuff and content stuff, which was what I was sort of, trained in, if you could say that. But I did that. And then as well, I would help run trainings and facilitate workshops kind of as well. So it was sort of like a 50-50 there, which was really, really cool. That was definitely like, I've never learned so much, in a short amount. Like I learned so much. I really feel like I got so lucky to find that when I did. I feel very grateful for that, honestly.
Well, yeah, because AJ&Smart kind of took the design sprint from Jake Knapp's book and owned it.
Yeah.
And I'm
assuming really
then. So I learned the design sprint. I read the book, and then I wanted to kind of get some more practical examples of it. So I'd essentially learned it from you, Jonathan, and Dee.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Now, that's really interesting in terms of that branding piece, because
Yeah.
essentially I fell fully into the funnel that AJ&Smart created. So it sounds like you were kind of at the beginning of that process.
Yes. So I was there when the switch happened where, we were like, we're just going to do design sprints. That's going to be our only thing. Because before it was like still doing some design project work where it was like, long term, like month long or, several months long projects and things like that. So it was like we made the transition to be like, no, we're a design sprint agency. That's like all we're going to do. And then the biggest, honestly, the key thing, one of the key things that AJ&Smart did that was so smart was aligning themselves with Jake Knapp, who is the most wonderful, friendly, nice person in the world. He's really lovely, but he was really a key factor because like once AJ&Smart, like, and we actually, it's such a simple thing that actually how this all came to be. So we were running a retrospective, 5 of us, maybe, it was a Friday afternoon in Berlin. And we were thinking about how we can elevate our status, kind of thing was the goal. It was like, we want to work with all these really cool companies, like, but we're so small. Like, how do we get there without, having to wait for a really long time until all of a sudden all of our social media blows up or whatever. Right. And so the idea that came out of the retrospective, like the little like sailboat exercise and all these funny things, was that we write an article about a sprint that we did with for the UN. So it was like a really cool sprint. It was like a charity, kind of sprint. And we were like, okay, we're going to write an article about that. We're going to send it to Jake Knapp and say like, hey, we're using your process. Like, look how, cool. We thought we would share this with you, blah, blah, blah. And he like responded right away and was like, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with me, blah, blah, blah. And then we were like, oh, also, by the way, we're going to be in San Francisco next month. Are you around? We weren't going to be in San Francisco. It was like, we were like, we'll come to San Francisco if you're willing to meet with us. So we were like, we're going to be there, will you be? And he was like, oh, absolutely. Like, blah, blah, blah. And so we were just like, okay. And then we like booked a trip to San Francisco, went and met with him. Again, he was just so lovely and wonderful to us. And then from there, the relationship grew and sort of like, because of that alignment, we got him to be on our YouTube channel. We got him to be a part of our trainings. We brought him over to run a big training. All of those things kind of happened. And that really positioned us really, really well to be like the design sprint agency.
Because AJ&Smart were they a UX agency originally?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So shifting a whole business to look at not entirely different, but it's a big movement, isn't it?
Yes.
What are the ingredients that you think made that possible at the time? Were you small and nimble, or the people that were you had at the time?
Honestly, I think it all comes down to focus. Like, I think that this is the one thing that people like, I'm now referencing the book, The One Thing again, but like, that is what makes, like, that's the recipe for success, is zeroing in on one thing and being the best at it and figuring out all the ins and outs of how to do that properly and how to, how to kind of make sure that everything about that one thing, so that when people are looking for someone to run a design sprint for them, that we're the ones they come to because they know we've zeroed it, we've focused and zeroed in. We also definitely leverage social media to a huge degree to become well known, and so those two kind of things together, I think, were really, and also just like, there was a little bit of a bet, taking a bit of a risk and being like, design sprints, okay, we're just gonna like jump in with that and hope for the best. but also we understood how powerful they were, like how powerful workshops are, is a big thing. So yeah, I think all of those things combined were, it was the right time, right place, but also like right decisions as well.
Because I'm aware of Jonathan Courtney's work,
Yeah.
who's CEO of AJ&Smart at this point. But he set it up with someone else. I think, was it 2 other people?
Yes, yeah, 2 other people. Yeah, and then now it's just him.
But I've heard him talk a lot about being open to taking risks, being open to doubling down on a hunch, and paying the money as well, like putting the money behind a social media campaign or putting the money into people to get it off the ground. So that sounds like a little bit of the willingness as well as a group to go, let's go for it. Like, but we're going to go for it.
Yes, exactly. Like no hesitation. Totally. Yeah.
Now, the social media side of things that you were involved in. Now so I have my own work, and the social media bit is the bit if I can outsource that as soon as possible, I am totally up for that. Is it something that you enjoy, or is it just something you get it and you know how to do it well? Because I know you've also done branding and strategy courses for small business owners and things like that as well, haven't you?
Yes. So this was the big thing when I left AJ&Smart and I went and I was like, I'm going to go on my own. Wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but I kind of had some inklings of the direction that I would go. But I sort of, I heard a lot of people were telling me you should consult around social media, around content, around brand. Like you should totally do that. You're so good at that. You should do that. Right. Like you're good on social media. Therefore you should consult around it. And I think that the thing is, I really listened a lot to other people in my first early days on my own. And now I realize that, listening to other people and what other people think you should do is you have to take these things with a grain of salt, because people see this and they're like, oh, you could make lots of money. Because it is a need. Like you said, you're like, I would outsource that immediately. There's a huge need for that work, which is great. So people see that potential for business. They're like, oh, you could open an agency and you could have blah, 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 and you would make a killing and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, but would I be happy doing that? Would I get excited every day going into my agency or whatever, or and I realized soon after I started doing that kind of work and that kind of consulting that it wasn't where, my heart was, if you want to get cheesy about it. But I found it's a world where it's very stressful. It's very fast paced. It's also very, I like a bit of stress. I'm the first person to tell you, I like to have those kind of stressful, exciting moments. But I also want to have a bit of downtime. And that's the thing where I think social media doesn't allow for, or at least if you let it get into your brain in that way, it can really kind of be very overwhelming, and you can, feel very anxious about it. And I found that that's how I was always feeling. I was like, I have to be present here. I have to keep doing this. I have to post this many times, and I have to be the best. I can't post something that's bad because I'm consulting around this exact topic, so everything has to be great. And it was just way too much pressure, and I stopped enjoying it. And that was the thing that was annoying, because I always really loved being on social media and, sharing and teaching things that I was learning, and building this kind of sense of community. And then it kind of I stopped feeling that way about it. And it started to be a real chore and really annoying. And I kind of had a bit of a moment where I realized oh, maybe this isn't for me, actually. Maybe I'm just not. I actually think, and this is kind of, I'm going to just say this, and I would love to know what you think about this, but I think that the best people who are really good at social media, as in, when I say that, as in they're good at being really consistent and showing up, and they have a plan, and they're, rolling all of their things out. Those people are usually very kind of like A-type people, right? They're very, very, very organized. You have to be, right? Super organized. They're not like, I mean, emotional is kind of a silly word to use, but I feel like they're less emotional about things. I am a highly emotional person. That's like, I always have been. I get impacted by things really easily. So this type of work where you're getting a lot of outside feedback, you're getting like your whole, your success is based on all of these metrics that you have zero control over. That's a dangerous place for me to be, in for work anyway. So yeah, I think I made the right call for me for sure. I am in awe of people who are, on social media, and, posting regularly and putting out like super high quality content all the time and just showing up and all that. I'm in awe of them because it's very, very, very difficult thing to do. Just showing up regularly is already tough. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of my feelings around it. I guess I still have some unresolved feelings. I find that when I kind of like ramble about something or like, I'm like, oh, I need to maybe like think about what it is that actually happened there. But yeah, in general.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say about the kind of the emotions of it. So my wife would very strongly say Ben is an emotionless, hard person. So like, I think I'm just very level. Not too many highs, not too many lows, which generally I think she appreciates in the long term. But I think she always imagined herself. Nice. I think she always imagined herself with like an artist who carried a guitar on his back and would like, be a lot more sort of.
Ben, we all did. We all imagined that.
So to be with an engineering maths teacher guy, hey, maybe we all have some unresolved issues to work with. But so on the emotion of social media, if I give an example of my feelings about the social media, I did it a lot when I was a teacher. I shared, like, we had a class blog, anonymized students, just for reference, but we had a class blog because I had a group that did not like maths. So we had a blog and each of them got a turn writing the blog, presuming that they kind of towed the line and were good and friendly and positive in their approach to everything. And then the one of them would write the blog and I would take instruction from them about what they wanted me to capture from the lesson. So the blog would like explain what we did each lesson. So I put that out regularly, but then that only happened regularly because I had to teach the lesson. And I told them that I was going to do that every lesson. If I didn't, they just, kids are unforgiving when you don't follow through on something you say we're going to do. So that allowed me to be consistent then. And I got a lot of interest in that and that worked. And then I also posted videos on the YouTube channel of math stuff, which it was 4 lessons. It wasn't for the wider world. So that's when I was consistent, when it was like for someone else, for something else. Left to my own devices, if I, for example, if I have to drive the same route, I'll try and go a different route every time. And that's what I find with social media is that I'll put a little bit of focus onto it and then I'll get distracted and I want to do something different. And that's not really the approach that's going to work with that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you could set up for yourself like a system of like, I'm going to do this for this one thing for 1 month, and then I'm going to switch it up or, learn from what's happened in that month or whatever, so you could honestly switching it up on social media is very, very good because people get used to, if you're posting kind of the same, like a similar format, let's say all the time, it's like people get kind of like, okay, it's a bit boring, I'm a bit bored. So it's not wrong of you to think like, I don't want to do the same thing constantly, but it's also a lot of effort if you're like, okay, and now I'm going to switch. Like the cool thing when you get sort of certain formats down is that you can just sort of recreate them consistently, right? And it's easy. Once you start focusing on making sure you're switching it up regularly, then that's when things go awry,
I've got a bit to think about. Thank you for my social media counseling session.
You're welcome.
But you're
That's
the guest.
honestly what I found when I was doing this kind of consulting. That's honestly, it was a lot of that sort of like me just pumping, like not actually that. That was a more, maybe a little less emotional, but a lot of the time I was talking with people and I'd just be like, no, it's good. It's good if you share what you know. And they're like, but will people like think that and I'm like, no, they're not going to think that. They're going to think it's great. Like it was just me constantly just like pumping people up and giving them pep talks, which I did actually enjoy that side of it because it really, you could see that people just needed that. And that feels nice when you're able to like give them something where you're like, this is actually going to give them a positive sort of confidence boost when they need it. But yeah.
So going across what so in terms of what you just said about taking stock of that approach and kind of deciding what the one thing is, they're also going back to university time when you're doing all those different courses. It's come up a few times on the podcast. So, we ask people what they do and like choosing what to do. But a lot of the time it's just removing the things you don't want to do. So like that seems to be the journey of, I tried that was a no. So I think one of the entrepreneurs we had on who's created her own jewelry business, her story was all about, did that, never want to do that again. Did that, that's definitely a no.
Totally.
So I think we all do that, I presume. I mean, I know I didn't want to work at McDonald's after doing that for a year.
Yeah. Sorry. I totally cut you off.
You.
I was just going to say that I think that this is easier for some people and harder for other people to identify, because I think if you're like, I consider myself a generalist for sure. I've never been like highly skilled in one sort of very specific thing, So for me, like every job I had, there were parts of it that I really liked. And then there were parts of it that I didn't like. So I was always kind of trying to find like when I was working at this agency back in Canada and in PR, I actually, like, we had clients who would, like, this is so funny. This is like a very old school thing. I don't even know if they still do it, but basically brands, like as a PR agency, you would be connected with a television station, right? And for your client, you'd be like, for this amount of money, we can show your product on like the morning show. And we'll be like, spring fashion trend ideas. These, are all coming from whatever brand or store or whatever. And then, they would get showcased in this sort of like non-news, non-advertisement thing. Anyway, so I actually ended up doing a few of those. Like I was put in that role. They were like, oh, let's like train Brittni to be on the morning show. So I appeared on a couple of like morning shows doing this thing where I was like fashion trends, which was just hilarious. But like, I loved that piece of it. I was like, that part of the work was really fun because it was, again, this sort of like presenting something and kind of being able to be like, also like the kind of like teaching component, like what to wear with what and blah, blah, blah. And like, it was just, it's funny that like, even back then when I was doing something very, very different to what I'm doing now, like it's very, very different, but there's still components of it that I see in the work that I did where I was like, oh, that part, I liked that, so, okay, I'm going to find more stuff that like involves that. So yeah, I think sometimes it's so hard to say no because you're like, well, I know I could be good at that. Like I could do that and I'd probably be fine. And I might even be somewhat happy, but it's so hard to identify like what is the right path, I find. Yeah. It's only happened recently for me and I'm turning 35 next month, and I feel like now I've got it. I'm like, okay, now I know what I want to do. And it felt like a fight for a long time before that.
I think we're still trying to find the exact audience that we're after with the podcast. Dean and I are interested in what people do and how they got there. But for anyone listening, like I feel there's a useful message there, and like you didn't know exactly what it was meant to be until 35, and that's okay. Like that. That's not odd. Because we all ask, if you're at a family event, there's like a 16, 17-year-old, we'll all as adults go, what do you want to be? And they feel like they need to give an answer. And I've never had a kid that I've heard say like anything other than maybe a doctor, whether that's specific. Like the answer is, I don't know. And nowadays it's going to be about 15 things anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So with all of those various things, you've talked about workshop facilitation and the event host, but we haven't talked about one of the things you do and have done, which is you've got up on stage as a comedian.
Yeah.
How did that start? What was that like? I'd love to hear more about that if you've got time.
This is this was something that I very much almost was as surprised as everybody else that I did it, to be honest. But basically what happened was I'd always loved comedy, always loved stand-up, been a fan for a long time. I moved to Berlin and I ended up being friends with this girl who did kind of like very sort of as a hobby, not very seriously, but she did stand-up comedy, and she would do these. There's actually a huge English language stand-up scene in Berlin. Lots of shows, lots of people doing it. Even like people from the UK come over because you can get so much more stage time here. And anyway, so it's a big deal. And back then it was kind of just kicking off. And so I was going to her shows all the time because I just loved it. And it was so fun. And they were always in these like cool, grungy basements. And I just loved it. And I was sitting watching her one day, and another friend of mine was sitting next to me. And she kind of like leaned over to me and she was like, I think you should do this. And I was like, are you like, there's no way, like, okay, yeah, I should do this. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're crazy. I would never, ever do that. And then I kind of like sat and watched the rest of the show. And then my brain was already like, well, if you did, like, then what would you talk about? And then I was like, okay. And then I like went home and I was like, well, if I did, maybe I would. And then all of a sudden I had like tons of sort of written jokes. And I think that my like, well, we can talk about joke writing, another time, but like, I love the idea of, I've always loved writing. And I always loved comedy and watched so much of it that I was able, like, I think I was kind of able to put something together that looked and felt like stand up. You know what I mean? I was like, I feel like this is kind of in the right direction. Anyway, and then I signed up for one of these like amateur nights. My friend kind of like got me into the good one, in Berlin, the one where there's like a nice crowd and stuff. And I did my 5 minutes. And it was really funny because the day of, so I was with my current partner, and he couldn't believe that I was going to do this. Like, he was so nervous. He was like dying. He was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And all my friends, like, I didn't even invite that many people, but I knew a few people there because of my one friend who does stand up. So they were all like, are you nervous when I got there? And honestly, I for some reason, I still to this day, I don't know how to replicate this because I get nervous all the time. But for some reason that day, I just wasn't nervous. I was like, no, like, I've like memorized my set, like not memorized it, but I've learned my set. I know exactly how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go up there, and if nobody laughs, then nobody laughs. But I did this cool thing that I can be proud of. So whatever, and there is a component to that I think I didn't realize until after the fact. The fact that I was living in Berlin and didn't know many people and was able to kind of go up anonymously. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't really matter if the people in the audience thought I was good or not. I'm in Berlin. There's so many people here. I'm completely like, there's no way that I would have done that, I think, if I had still stayed in Canada. It was something that I really think I did because I could kind of reassess Brittni. Like, who is Brittni really? And like, what is her thing, And I think that was a really powerful thing about moving countries, was the ability to sort of rehash and like look inside and be like, okay, I'm going to not listen to everybody that I grew up with and everybody who thinks that they know me and who I am and what I would do and what I wouldn't do. I'm just going to do what I want to do and, you know, see where it takes me. And so that was really cool. So I totally fell in love with it. The set my first set, it's like, it was kind of like drugs, you know, like that first high, like you'll never get that one again.
Yeah.
That was kind of like my first set because it was so fun and everybody, the audience was very like on fire. They were very up for it, you know, so it went well, right? And I got lots of laughs and I was just like, oh my God, I love this. This is so fun. And so then I just started doing it a ton and I started like writing a ton and I would do shows and I went to the UK a few times. I did comedy back in Canada as well. And yeah, it was like this fun hobby that I was doing. Now, I have to say that I have, since COVID happened and all the shows, I was actually running a weekly open mic show for about 3 or 4 years. Anyway, and that kind of COVID shut that one down, obviously. But so since COVID, I haven't really gotten back to it regularly. And have gotten kind of busy with my work in a good way, like very focused on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that I use to this day. I love, like, I still love comedy and I think I will like, you know, get up and do more sets at one point, but I think I'm just taking like a bit of a breather right now.
A friend of mine who, you know, he didn't necessarily caught it, but we were like, you ever thought about stand-up? Because you're very funny. And all this. And I suppose is stand-up one of those things where no one can admit themselves that they think they'd be good at it without sounding very arrogant. You need someone else to tell you, really, don't you?
That's true. It is true. Yeah, there's always a few of those people that are like, you know, yeah, I think I should do. And they're always the worst ones.
Yeah,
they go up and you're like, no. Because the thing about comedy is being good at it is it's based on self-awareness. So it's like like a lot of it anyways, being aware of how you're perceived by the audience can really make you funnier, right? Because you know what they're seeing, so you can play on that, right? Like, so I always played up like, my name's Brittni, I'm blonde and bubbly, you know what I mean? So I played that up in all of my comedy to be kind of like, I would be like really cutting sometimes and it would be very surprising because people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that, you know? Or I would kind of lead people down to think that I like am not very smart. I don't know what I'm talking about, but then I would like come in with it, you know? So it's like, you have to play with that. And I think someone being like, you know, I think I'm pretty funny. There's not a lot of self-awareness in that. You know what I mean? Like, because you'd be aware of what people are thinking when you say that, you know? So it's interesting.
Because during lockdown, my friend did some online open mic gigs. Did you try any of those at all?
I refused. I was like, I won't. I can't do it. It just the whole, like, the whole like when it comes to comedy, the environment is so important. Being sat next to people who are also laughing and it's like kind of dimly lit and all this stuff is so key to a good comedy experience. I mean, I thought it was cool that people were doing that. Like, I was like, cool, that's great. But I think I also, that's right when I kicked off as a freelancer. So I was super busy as well. So but I maybe would have tried it, but I was really hesitant. Yeah.
It turned out to be the most hilarious Tuesday night for about 4 weeks in a row that we had, but not specifically because of, you know, not as they planned it to be. It was just inadvertently comedic gold. Watching people kind of fail to unmute. It was open. It was a bit more open in that he was doing comedy. There were a few other people doing comedy. Some people were doing music.
Okay, cool.
And it really brought out a very interesting mix of people that we really appreciated as a group.
Entertainment value, you know, like that sounds really good. That's the other thing about like shows like that, like general open mics. I think it's really like, I'm actually reading a book right now. I'm just going to grab it really quickly. Mm-hmm. It's called, The Art of Gathering. Have you heard of this?
Again, one I've seen, but no, I've not looked into it.
Prya Parker. I'm really enjoying it. If you work in any sort of fashion of like getting people together, it's a good one. But she talks about like having like a very specific purpose for your gatherings, right?
Okay.
And therefore what you deliver depends on that purpose. And I find these like open mics are very much focused on the performers and what they want, and less on the audience and what the audience wants, So that's why I find like music open mics, awesome. Comedy open mics, awesome. Poetry open mics, awesome, But when you mix those three, I feel like there's some audience that are there for the comedy. There's some that are there for the music, and there's some that are there for the poetry, and they're not the same audience. And they can be like, I could be someone who loves all three of those things, but on a certain day, I want to watch comedy, and on a certain day, I want to watch, So I think it's just like, I love the idea of being like, our open mic is about comedy and comedy only, and then everybody there is ready to laugh. Everybody's coming in, because then, I mean, yeah, I've just seen so many sort of disasters when it comes to the mix, Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we had a guy in a New York apartment wearing a Mahatma Gandhi see-through shirt, doing spoken word. Fabulous. Through to an older lady on a guitar in rural England. And it was just, and everything in between. It was kind of fantastic, but yeah, I didn't know what I was there for. Like, in terms of a purpose, I don't know.
Yeah. That was like a COVID specific fabulous event.
It was a moment in time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm really glad we got to the comedy bit as well. Because it is what you do, but it's funny that you've called it a hobby, not so much your work. I presume that's just out of whether you could live off it or not. It's kind of the key to
Pretty much. And also there's another reason, like becoming a professional comedian is obviously no easy feat. But also there's like, I found that the lifestyle of a comedian also is a tough one, and for me, like this balance, but just being able to maintain like a healthy lifestyle is really important. And when you're in bars every night till midnight, doing even if you're like not drinking at the bar, you're still like, your sleep is all kind of messed up all the time. You're traveling a ton and it's just like everything kind of about it is, that's why I loved these years where I was able to do it. Like I traveled a little bit for it, but mostly I just like was in Berlin, and I could go to all these shows and work on it and figure out what works on people and what doesn't, and just have fun with my writing. And it was very much like a hobby for me, and I love it.
So I'm really glad we got to talk about that bit as well. So as we wrap up, thank you for kind of giving us that journey. It's a really, really fascinating kind of process of understanding that. And it sounds like caught you at a really interesting point where you've reevaluated and started to focus in on the one thing, which I think is a bit of the theme, and may even go into the title for this one, The One Thing with Brittni Bowering.
Cool.
So just as a final question, or final two questions potentially, what we tend to ask everyone is if you could be anything and do anything, what would that be? If I can fire that one at you first.
I think simply I would do close to what I'm doing now, but maybe on like a higher level, so I would love to just be a host. Like I would love to be sort of a professional host, maybe. Or have my own show. Honestly, maybe I just want to go right back to, 8-year-old Brittni's dream.
Well, so when you were talking about the comedy, and then I went back to when you said you wanted to be a talk show host. Maybe at the time when you were seeing talk show host as the one to be, at that time, I suppose there were less female comedians to see.
Definitely less.
And I wonder if, had you seen that at that time, that's what you would have said anyway.
Maybe. Yeah. But I still think if I could be anything, the thing is, if I were just a host, if I just hosted events and was like being like, hey, everybody, blah, 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 I would miss the interaction with people, and that's what I love about workshops and facilitating is like, I'm working with them. There's like 10 of us, and it's very kind of, you get sort of personal and you get to know people. And I would miss that if I just did big event hosting, So yeah, it's something in between. I guess I still need to figure that out.
I think there's the theme as well. I think we've all got lots. It's okay to still need to figure things out.
Yes, totally agree.
But I think the final question we normally ask people is kind of, what advice would you give to kind of someone on that journey, sort of, like a younger Brittni or someone wanting to get into the work you're doing? But I suspect the one thing is probably the book we need to give them. But is there any other bits?
Yeah.
Are there any other bits of advice you'd like to finish on that people can take away from your experience?
I think the advice that I would give people, especially early days, is to try to experience as much as you can. Probably a lot of people say that, but I just think that it's so true. It's really important to be open to exploring different routes and different possibilities. And I think that's one thing that I definitely did, was I was very open to be like, okay, like, what is that? Let me learn about that, and be curious and be eager. I think that's one thing that we were talking about this last night with some friends about the new generation, and there's a little bit more of this, feeling that they're owed a certain thing. Like there's a little bit of this, instead of feeling like you need to earn it, and like work hard and get excited and be motivated. And, I think that early on in your career is just, we're desperate for those people right now. So if you can be one of those people, I think you're going to do really great.
That's a whole new podcast episode in itself,
I know.
Isn't it? Exploring that.
Let's not get into that.
I've had that come up a bit. We're doing some work on flexible working. Comes up a bit in that, in terms of, does one policy fit everyone in an organization? You'd hope not.
Yes.
But
yeah.
What does each person want? And yeah, that's definitely come up a few times too. But like I say, that's for another time.
Yes.
Brittni, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated it. As you probably noticed, I kind of discovered you through some AJ&Smart videos and have kind of followed the trajectory a little bit. So really fascinating to kind of put the whole picture together. And I'm sure those that listen in will feel the same as well. So massive thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was really such a nice, I guess it's so funny. I was just going to say, it was a really nice conversation. It was all about me, but I think people do like talking about themselves, don't they? So you probably have a pretty, quite a few really interesting episodes. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be on your podcast. It was really lovely.
Thank you very much.